everybody. A little bit of a fireside chat with Mum, who has been talking over the past, number of years really, of how different words are used in the media, both newspapers and online and even in television, of what do they actually mean, what they actually say. One of the biggest things that they're trying to put across is when big companies, so we won't name any of those big companies,
but multinationals basically,
sometimes across the world, they then say that they are making a loss on something. So it's reported on the mainstream media that they're making a loss. But when you actually listen to the figures, it's that they haven't made as much profit as has been forecast. Well, that's not a loss, is it?
No. It's when people hear they have made less profit this year than the year before, then people think, oh, less, that must be loss. And it's going to live its own life because people then think, oh, they have lost money. No, they've still made a profit, but not as much as was forecast or in the previous year. And that's how your mind is manipulated in thinking that they're doing badly, but they're not really. Instead of making 10 million profit, they maybe made 8 million profit, but it is still a profit.
Yeah.
So
even £1 is a profit.
Yeah.
So the £1 is a profit. When you think of that 10 million and they're only making 8 million as a profit, but they're making £2 million as a loss based from the forecast to what's actually going through the books. And they do it by quarters as well. So they split the whole year up into quarters. Yeah. So what you do have to do is keep an eye on how much the numbers are actually saying to what they're actually reporting, because they're not reporting it exactly the way it is. What they're doing is they're twisting it around on you. So the other thing that's cropped up is, how our food prices are going up at the minute. We have to be careful what we say because we know that we can be censored on a lot of things. So our prices in the UK are going up. Now, what did you find out, Mum, with the rate of exchange?
Well, the funny thing is that the rate of exchange is going up. That means today it's the pound is the equivalent of $1.36 and €1.20. Yesterday it was €1.19 and $1.35. A couple of weeks ago it was €1.18 and $1.34. It means that that's no longer tied to all the things that are taking place in the world, that it's leading a life of its own. Now, it has been said by people who are more knowledgeable in the financial field than I am, that this is caused by the fact that the Chinese people or the state is no longer investing in dollars, but in pounds. Therefore, the pound is going up. But it is a very strange thing that a rate of exchange can fluctuate the way it does at the moment. It's very volatile, and it shouldn't be, because it should not be based on, one event in the world, possibly. It's very sort of, it doesn't leave a nice feeling, put it that way.
When we look at things like transportation costs, Mum, you've got oil is one of the biggest things I use. Petrol, diesel, oil in different forms. But where does that oil actually come from?
It comes from all over the place, because you can't use one type of oil to supply, say, maybe the west of Europe. It's got to be a mixture of it. And you've got Brent oil, and that's, a certain price, then it's...
Is that called Brent crude oil?
Yeah.
So it's crude,
it's
a barrel,
raw form. Barrel, yeah.
It goes by a barrel, so like as in a little barrel, or is it a big barrel?
No, big barrel. It's a standard size, and if you look in the market, it says, and Brent is now, doing $16 a barrel. Well, it's far higher than that now. But it's funny that in some places in Europe, you maybe buy a liter of petrol at the pump for, at the moment, over €2, as is the case in Holland. And you go across the border to Germany or Belgium, and it's a lot lower. Now,
that doesn't make sense.
No, if you think the way the crow flies. I mean, they're all in it together for a start. And then there's hardly, just across the border, now, if the transportation cost is that high, to deliver from the refinery to somewhere in Germany as to somewhere at the German-Dutch border, what's the difference?
Mm.
And it's a tax that the government takes from it.
I was going to say
Yeah.
I mean, I know that when you buy a litre of fuel or a gallon of fuel,
Mhm,
depending on whether you use old system or new system, the vast majority of it is tax.
Yes, that's correct.
So why does, I mean, apart from the obvious answer, but why does the taxman put so much money on a litre of fuel?
Well, it depends how the infrastructure of your country is put together. In Britain, you have got a long roads south, north, and not so much east-west, but in countries on the continent, it's a different matter. And anything that needs a road transport, and it does in most cases, they can bring back most from the road transport. Because if you think that maybe Rotterdam is a big port, then they put a lot of the cargo onto ships and it's going on the Rhine or the Rhone, and it goes from there. Well, the Rhone actually goes, I think, to Antwerp. But anyway, it then goes inland and it's a big volume that can be transported in one go. So that's entirely different from a transport firm who's got maybe 10 lorries that need to distribute the same cargo to different points.
I mean, I don't know whether you know the answer to this one, but you know how you get the big tankers that deliver the fuel to the petrol stations? Does the fuel that they use, do they get that for free, or is it a lower cost or whatever to actually transport it around? Do you know?
You mean how that is done? How it's calculated?
No, the actual physical vehicle itself, the tanker, that brings the fuel to the petrol pump to then load up, and put that into their tank. That fuel that they use to be on the road, do they get that for free? Or
I don't know that. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out.
It could be that,
if anybody has the answer,
that
get in touch
in
the comments, because I'd like to know.
If it's for instance Shell that's distributing the petrol by their own transport, it could still be divided up as accountants do, to do it that way. Otherwise, I don't think it would be, well, I've seen there are ships that go onto the waterways in Holland or onto what they call the Waddenzee, north of Holland, for holiday purposes, and they take fuel on board. And I remember they used to moor across the road from us in the canal, and there used to be tankers that delivered that. And the tankers were actually owned by a company. So it wasn't the, say, Shell or BP, but it was, Dixon that delivered this type of fuel to the ships. So then it's a transport company itself that specialized in fuel distribution. So I don't know how it works, but there are two different ways of doing it.
Okay. Have you seen over the last couple of years since this hoo-ha all began, what sort of changes have you seen in the price of a barrel of Brent crude?
I think it's gone up, then it's stabilized again, and I haven't checked it lately. But
so when we hear about that the price of oil has gone up, we seem to see automatically at the petrol station the prices go up. But that doesn't make sense because of how they harvest it.
Well, they tell you that they have got a 3 months stock. That's the answer you always get. So why, when it goes from today till tomorrow and the price is hiked up, let's say maybe 5 pence a litre of petrol at the pump, how can they justify that when they've bought it 3 months ago? It's the same with.
But the other thing is that price going up very rarely comes back down again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So for 3 months they're getting extra money coming in.
It only goes
but
down.
The taxman is as well.
Yeah, but it's a glut. If you get a glut in the storage, then they've got to keep, because remember, a lot of the fuel is transported by huge tankers. Now, if you're big, like Rotterdam, Venice, where they keep all these vast amounts of fuel it must sort of be sold. It must get out of the tanks to get the tankers via the seaways to unload into these bulk. It's like, what do you call it? It's to keep things like a store.
Silo.
That's it. Yeah. So they've got to get rid of it then, and then you get a glut. And there was a glut when they told you during the lockdown you couldn't go in the car. So the government didn't get as much money in revenue because they couldn't rake it off because people didn't go out and use their cars.
Yeah.
That's it. So now they're trying to get it back. But also it is based on how does the market feel. And when there's somewhere in the world, like now in Ukraine, over maybe going to get a war because Russia has amassed troops at the border, then all of a sudden your oil price is going up and they're telling you that all the oil comes from Russia.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. But that's what they want you to make because it is
If oil,
an uncertainty.
if all the oil came from Russia, then why have we got so many? There's no disparagement here, but why have we got so many Arabian people who are very, very wealthy based on the oil industry?
Yeah, well,
You know, that wouldn't make any sense. And America has its own as well. So,
Nigeria.
you know, yeah, Nigeria's long since been known about
yeah.
it. So when oil is taken out of it, because oil and gas are a natural resource, aren't they? So that's something that is on or in the earth that we have access to. Now it might come up like, you know, the Beverly Hillbillies where oil starts coming up out through the ground.
No, that's very real.
It is, but it does happen on occasion. But the other thing is to look at, you know, where are we getting it from? You know, is it a land-based thing or is it predominantly a sea-based thing?
It could be either.
Because we see these big oil rigs on the sea.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of really kind of brave men and women that go and work on the oil rigs because it's not an easy life out on them.
No.
But whenever they actually, because people have it in their heads, I know what I would think if Douglas hadn't been part of the oil industry, but I would think, okay, they just drill down, they get the oil, and it gets sucked up. But that's not actually what happens, is it?
Not actually what happens. And it also, a lot of these platforms are no longer being used and they cap the well. And that's because if the big oil companies are not going to make a profit on the amount of oil which is available, they're going to cap the less profitable, the less producing wells.
We'll get back to that one in a minute. But just to explain how oil and gas is actually extracted from the earth, whenever because if you have oil, you have gas.
Yeah.
That's simple, you know, the two go together hand in hand. So do they pump something into the earth to push the oil and gas out?
Well, not to my knowledge. I know the gas is flared off because they tell you that it can't be used. So that's why you quite often see a flare on platforms.
Oh, so that's the sort of like big, you know, you see the flaming bit on an oil rig, right? Okay.
And they put down a pipeline, and through the pipeline, the oil flows. Yeah.
Right. And does it have to be a constant flow?
I think it has to, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I know they do the pressure and the pressurization of it, because the oil pipelines that you see are huge, big, you know, rotund things.
And there's an awful lot of them on the North Sea bed. And then they put all these rocks on either side and then they cover them so that if the fishermen go and they've got a net which drags along the seabed.
So trawlers.
Yes, that, you know, they don't damage the pipeline.
Right, okay.
But
So-
there are pipelines over land as well.
Yeah, because you see them in Nigeria and
Well,
Russia.
that's what happened in Nigeria. People helped themselves and they'd been drilling holes in the pipeline, tapped off the oil spilled out because they didn't plug it again. And then Shell got the blame for polluting the whole of, and they've got enough. In my time, that was in the 80s, they had enough it was a massive amount that they could have exported and used in that, but it was a tremendous waste.
I know a lot of people got hurt because it inadvertently caught fire and they're working with it with their hands and everything, you know. And so, you know, you could say it was their own comeuppance, but we're really sort of looking at when these big oil companies and everything do things, because they're making profit year on year on year.
Yeah.
Even when they say they're making a loss, it's because one part of that company might be making a loss, not the whole company.
Oh no, but it'll cover it. And if they think, if they've got exploration fields which are, well, think of Cyprus, and the Greeks and the Turks still haven't come to an agreement as to who owns what round about Cyprus, but it's a known fact that round about Cyprus is a wealth of oil,
Right.
and they're
Okay.
not touching it. The same was the case in Sarawak in Indonesia, but they're not touching these things because it's politically
Volatile.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So, well, that makes sense. But going back to when you're saying about capping off an oil well,
Yeah.
I mean, I know from Douglas that one of the reasons he always said we have got more than enough oil to last us over 300 years, even exponentially using it for, you know, our use going up and up and up. Now we're not going into the carbon footprint of you know, using oil and fossil fuels and things, but just looking at it from that point of view, what he said was that it wasn't that there wasn't enough oil, it was that they couldn't get to the oil. So, but now I know they've got the technology because Robert Gordon Institute has put out technologies. They've been using it for a little bit, along, you know, in partnership with some of the companies. And it actually is like bendable, you know, when they drill down, instead of drilling straight down.
They never drill straight down.
No.
They always do it from the side.
Yeah, so they always go that way.
Yeah.
But these things can actually go like that. It's like a wiggle sort of thing. So it can find an oil reserve and gas reserve and then bring that up. Now, with using those technologies, that means that there should be no scarcity, really. Now, on the flip side of that, Mum, we're kind of being pushed into having everything electric. So you look at the electric cars and stuff like that at the moment. With the electric cars, my understanding is that they can't recycle the batteries at the moment.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. So I don't know how they're going to get away from it. The idea in itself is great, but then you're going to make everybody dependable on one source again. So what happens when that source is no longer available?
Yeah,
and it's the same with electrical cars. When you think about it, a petrol car, when you look at, for instance, documentaries in Russia, and you see the people, the children going to school, there is an old bus that we wouldn't even think about going on to that collects them. And then if it gets stuck, all the children sort of, you know, they must be prepared mentally or whatever, certainly the way they're dressed, and they're all sort of waiting patiently till the driver gets out of the bus and sorts it in some way, and then they all carry on again. Now, if you've got an electrical car, and you even see it with the modern cars, they take a unit out. If you haven't got that unit, you're stuck.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think about how things are being done in the outback in Australia, in America, and South America, and in Russia, where people still tinker about with the stuff,
yeah,
it keeps going for longer. But if you take that away, they're all apathy.
I know from the garages that I've spoken to who have had to have, you know, like, the mechanics have to go and learn about, you know, how to do an electric car and, you know, maintain it and things like that. There's specialist equipment that they have to use and things like grounding mats and stuff like that, so they don't get electrocuted while they're working with it. You're not going to have that at the side of the road.
No, it's not.
So basically, if your car runs out of charge, or if it mucks up in some sort of way, you're left at the side of the road and it has to be a recovery. Now, there's the recovery vehicle then running on electricity to come and do it. I mean, it's like, you know, it's one of those of like, how's that actually going to work? I don't know about anybody else, but I feel as though we're being pushed into having something that they want us to have.
Yeah.
And it's never been for our benefit. It's always been for the benefit of profit.
You've always got to think, why are they doing the thing? And then ask yourself, what's the benefit of it? And could there be another benefit that doesn't come my way? And that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got a clear answer and you're just going for it, or you want to be trendy, or you want to belong to the tribe that goes for the electric vehicles, fine. But there's always a risk attached, because remember that people who are draining you more in sort of in places that can tell you what to do, not to do, and you follow it blindly, they always think for themselves, and they've got two arms, and they like to go like this all the time. So just stop, because I don't know of anybody in power, whether they're elected or not, thinking what's most profitable and what's best for the people. And 5 people in the European Parliament have said this openly, that we should stop and think. And by the way, European Parliament members are not elected. So, and they're telling us, as was the case with the whiskey, the water, Scotland producing absolutely beautiful whiskies. All of a sudden,
And you can attest to that.
yes, I can attest to that, because I like a malt whiskey and every now and then make it last. But yes, I do like that. And it's the water that goes to make the whiskey as well. And they wanted Scotland, and this was I think in the 70s, to add certain chemicals in it, because that was going to be done all over Europe. Now, I mean, that doesn't make sense. If you've got a good product, you're not going to tamper with it.
No.
Because then your good product is going to change,
Yeah.
and it's out the window. So fortunately in Scotland, they were wise enough to say, oh, no, we get our water from natural resources and we'll keep this going. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But you see, there's now in Holland, and Holland is not exactly known for their good quality of water, because it can be very hard. You get a lime scale,
Yeah.
you know, the big cities
Colour.
and that, yes, colour, as we
Yeah.
call it. Yeah, you see it on the plants even. Now, they are now producing whiskies in Holland. Yeah, I think
no
even on
thanks.
the island.
No
of
disrespect
Texel-
to the Dutch,
no,
but no
no,
thanks.
I'm just saying, I stick to my favourite.
I mean, as far as I'm
Typical,
concerned, the Dutch make cracking cheese.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, they make wonderful cheeses.
yeah, and they export
you
it
know,
up.
yeah.
Look at the Edam cheeses like plastic. I mean, if you're running out of stuff to do your building with, and you, what do you call it, around about your windows,
seals.
like your putty,
Yeah.
you use the Edam that they import here, because it's
plastic.
It's plastic.
Yeah.
Don't go in. Right. And all the cheese has got additives in it, bar one, and that's Beemster cheese. It's the only cheese in the Netherlands.
How do you spell that?
It's Beemster, and it's named. There's a polder Beemster. It's on the UNESCO.
You need to explain what a polder
The
is.
polder is land that was drained. It used to be a lake. They took the water out. They put windmills round about it, drained the water out, and reinforced the dikes round about it, and then it became arable land.
So that's farming land.
Yes, farming land.
Right.
And they did that over 400 years ago. One of
How,
the polders.
how long does it take for them, the time of draining that land?
Oh,
to
it takes
then
quite a
become
while, because it takes.
usable.
Well, I know if something floods and, you know, the water from, say, seawater or whatever, it leaves a mark, by the way, on your walls. You can always say, oh, the water came up to here,
Yeah.
as was the case in Zeeland, the southern southwestern province, which borders onto Belgium. It borders the British Channel.
Yeah.
The province of Zeeland in 1953. In February, they had a very bad storm, and it took many lives,
Right.
people as well as animals. It was horrendous. I remember that because my mother sent jumpers that I was wearing at the time as a, you know,
To
young
help out.
child to help out. Yeah. And then they came up with the Delta works. So they put dikes across it, and they could manage the water better and keep it at bay. But it was springtime, the same is happening now.
Did they not have something before that called the rump?
That was the rum.
That was the
That
rump.
was the rum. Yeah,
Right.
disaster.
Because I've seen pictures of that where
Yeah.
they've got, you know, people
Yeah.
on the roofs of the houses.
That's
and,
right. Yeah.
You know, really. So how long did that last for then?
Well, it takes at least 7 years because before the land can be used again.
Didn't the Germans actually, whenever they occupied Holland, they
Yeah.
broke some of the
They
dikes?
broke
Not
some dikes,
not all of
and the
them, but-
friendly fire of the RAF. They dropped the bomb on the water. And
Really?
that was, yes, that happened in Wieringermeer. The Wieringermeer polder is because these drained lakes are called polders. You've got the oldest is the Beemster.
Mhm.
Then you get the
That's where you
Purmer.
get the cheese from.
Yes.
Beemster
Then you
Pass.
get the Purmer. That's also in North Holland.
Mhm.
Because it was all open to the sea, but people got flooded every high tide storm. So they thought, now wait a minute, if we drain this area and then we put a dike against it, you know, round about it, then we've got only this dike to contend with,
Yeah.
and we really fortify it. then the other dikes which aren't strong enough to withstand the sea at that moment, they become lesser dikes, but you don't have to watch them the same. And that's what he did with the former Zuider Zee. He put a dike across it. I think it's 35 millimeters, no, 1935. And it was, I don't know how many kilometers long it is, but it connects the north of Holland to Friesland. And that meant it was called an afsluitdijk. I think it was in the third.
How would you translate that?
Well, that is the closing off dike.
Yeah.
Afsluiten is to close something off.
Right.
Which meant that, in effect, the Zuiderzee became a lake. So there was no high and low tide anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they only had to take care of this great big dike with sluices and had put in place, and it still is there, great connection from one part of the country to the other. But that was the one that buffeted against the open water of the North Sea coming in. All the shores like Hoorn, Amsterdam, all these places that are bordering the Zuiderzee, they were then a lot safer.
So is that two names then, the IJsselmeer and the Zuiderzee?
Yes,
Are they one in the same place?
Yes, because
Right.
Zuiderzee is southern sea,
Yeah.
and IJsselmeer is where the river IJssel
Comes in.
and
Right,
meer
okay.
is the name for lake.
Yeah.
So from a sea it became a lake, and the water changed from being salt water to fresh water.
Right. Okay.
So, but they found out through the delta works that the water from the North Sea still goes to the bottom and creeps up into the freshwater area.
Does it?
Yes, it does.
Right. Okay.
So
That's
how it
interesting.
works.
Yeah. Very interesting.
But they used to get a lot of disasters and floods where I used to live in Holland, and it was a horrendous thing.
I know that these things happen, but whenever you look at that, it's man-made basically. It's man-made engineering. It's cracking pieces of engineering. You know, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
But my question always is, okay, it's like over 400 years old. Some places around the world have got different systems. You know, Sweden has the canal system as well. Just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should do something.
No.
So what do we think was possibly the driving force to do that in the first place?
You mean
In Holland?
In Holland. Well, it was to make sure that people didn't have to contend with the floods every now and then, because it would set them back so much.
Right. But now they're constantly paying rather than actually moving.
Well, yeah. Well, the drainage of the polders, the lakes, which then became polders, as was the case with the Beemster. And at the moment this year, the Purmer, the next one to be drained, is celebrating its 400 years anniversary. Wealthy merchants from Amsterdam invested their money in it because they could see that if this would yield good land to grow things on, or to have your cattle on, that would be a very sound investment. And it also gave a lot of people a job because of how the dikes were constructed. So it created a lot of wealth, but it also created an investment opportunity.
But for me, when somebody, like, they're just looking at profit, as in, you know, creating that wealth, there are going to be losers, because that's the polarity of that sort of thing. And I always wonder if it had been left naturally the way it was. I mean, I know you wouldn't have been born there, you know, because it wouldn't have existed really.
No.
But that said, you know, it would have been something different. You would have been somewhere else, you know. But I'm always a little bit wary about, you know, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something.
Yeah.
And the legacy can carry on for centuries and centuries.
Certainly, yeah.
You know, and people get so used to something so quickly. I mean, all you've got to do is look at the past 2 years and how used to, you know, people are to wear masks.
Yeah.
That as soon as they go into a shop or something, even though they're not there anymore, they just put, that's it. They're not even thinking about it.
No.
That's only in the space of 2 years.
Yeah.
So over a few hundred years, you know, people straight away they start to see something. It's, oh, that's always, you know, it's the Scottish Borders thing. It's Irene.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
I
it's
know.
always been that way.
But you should have a balance, and if you can see, I mean, when the Zuiderzee was sort of Edam, for instance, had been a very thriving place, and people, there were lots of shipbuilding yards, and there was a lot of wood was being imported from the Baltic states. There was salt being imported, slaves, because the slave trade was rife all over Europe. But when they put a sluice in one of the canals in Edam, it became, because they didn't want the water from the Zuiderzee to go into the then Purmer Lake, which hadn't been drained yet. They thought, oh, well, in the middle of the town, we'll put a sluice, and that will put an end to this water coming in.
That's that huge big. So
yes, it's like a big
trying to get up over there on your bike is a little bit
right.
difficult because it's really steep to do that.
Well, that's what it did, but it paid to Edam's wealth as a seafaring nation, basically.
Right.
Because
so the merchants, I was going to say the merchants were before that, the draining of the lakes and everything then.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, because it's lovely cobblestone streets there.
Yes, I know.
You know,
I know.
It's a really lovely place to be.
And the church also had a special room with big books, and they were all chained because that was very precious in the time. And the young men, in particular, used to go there to learn Latin, because if you wanted to see a bit of the world, you had to be able to communicate and to navigate, and this was all done. You know, the knowledge was sort of all done in Latin.
Yeah, that's funny. That's quite interesting, because you know we know that Latin is actually an amalgam language, and it's been done purposely. So already back then they were gearing people up to learn Latin, so that you can go and travel the world and you can communicate. But people around the world find ways. We've always had ways of communicating, even if you don't know the language. Sure. No, you've got your hands, you've got your feet, you know, your expression in your face as well. At the moment, you can't really see that all the time, but you know.
But the intention is there. If you want to communicate and you don't know the language, and you want to know whether someone comes from another part of the world, you get a map out. Are they married? There are certain signs for that. You can ask if they have children, and you know, they do this. And
that's
you get quite well on, and if you're,
I was going to say hungry, or you want to drink.
That's it. And this is how.
But you start to learn little words, because somebody will point to something and they will call it by the name in their language, and then you start to learn that.
There's another thing though. A lot of the people went out later on to discover things like plants, trees, and they brought back seeds. Now that was all. I think it was Linnaeus who did it, and that was all done in Latin. And the nice thing about that is, if you visit a garden, say in the West of Scotland, and you see a sequoia tree, you know the Latin name for it, and you go to another part of the world and you see the same tree and you remember that Latin name for it, then you've got an immediate.
We talked about this yesterday or the day before, and I agree with that. I think
that's a good thing.
To an extent, but I think the common names that we have for plants and trees tell us a lot about what those plants and trees can do, and that's kind of been lost a lot of the time.
Yes, it has, sadly, because like feverfew or other herbs, it indicates what they were being used for.
All heal.
That's right.
You know.
And that has been lost, and that's a shame, because it's a very good indication of what the plant's properties are.
But people have kind of been geared away from plants, haven't they? Because especially with the building of cities and the big industries and everything like that, you know, it was like, oh, come and get a job here, and you don't have to worry about anything. And
but then you got the parks again, and that was for everybody's benefit, because they realized that people needed fresh air and a place to later on relax or recuperate, as the case may be. But nowadays you see people buying trees, and they're unnatural because they don't let them grow. They're becoming too big to their liking, so they must all be a certain height. It's like a sort of, well, it's a bigger version of the bonsai.
It's not only that, but they're not buying indigenous and trees and shrubs and things like that.
And then they wonder why the trees die.
Well, this is it. And whenever cats scratch against it, they have a right go. You can shout in the middle of the street,
if
like
if they're too tall, then you get complained, or the trees taking my light away. And whereas
Yeah.
before you had certain trees at old farmhouses, and they put certain trees in front of it because it provided shade in
Yep.
the summertime.
And it wasn't
Which is
just,
very
it wasn't just
cleverly
that.
done.
How those divisions, if you like, boundaries were created, also gave wildlife, because it gave you a complete mix of
That's
wildlife
right.
that all lived together.
Yeah.
And also that the fruits and the flowers
Mhm.
that came off of it had an effect on you. So even if you don't go and pick it and eat it,
Mhm.
it still has an
Yeah.
effect on you. So it's really, really clever.
Yeah.
Now what they're doing is they're just stripping everything bare all the time to, oh, well, it needs to look neat.
Well,
You know,
you look at a lot of the pavements that are being put in place, or the parking spaces for cars in the cities, and they actually take a part of the root systems of the trees that are lining the pavements, take that away, and then the trees are falling over or they're dying, and they wonder why, how come, and you get all this water down.
I was going to
You
say,
know,
they've got
and
the
it's
runoff on it.
causing
Yeah.
erosion, and your tiles are all popping up and not lined straight, and you put your foot in it and you've got broken leg. So I mean, yeah, it's nonsensical.
It is. It doesn't make any sense to me when I mean, plane trees, I get the idea of that in London, because the plane trees out the back, they're like the trees that if you it looks like plaques are on them.
Yes, yes, it's
And
like
they
bits
deliberately,
coming off.
yeah, and they deliberately planted them because of the smog in London,
Yeah.
and they will take up a lot of the smog.
But Napoleon planted a lot of them in France too.
Yep, he did. But what happens is that the plaque gets filled up, the tree pushes it out to the plaque, and then the plaque falls off.
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, all those particles that are in the air, and these are particles, not, you know, molecules or vapors or whatever. And these are actually particles. The plaque falls off, and you know, the tree carries on growing, everything's fine.
It's a filtering
Yes,
system.
it
It's
is.
innate. Yeah.
Basically, like everything on this earth,
Yeah.
we are even filtering systems, because
Yeah.
we transform energy.
I don't look
You
like
know.
one. But
No, you're a very complex one, but pretty good looking with it as well. So, but yeah, all these different things that happen, you know, and yet what we keep seeming to do with science and engineering and everything like that is constraining things to be what we think or what we're told is beautiful or pretty or functional or whatever. And maybe it's not. Some of the best ideas for functionality that I've seen have come from, you know, guys who are sitting there whittling something, and they make this little, you know, tiny sort of like, you know, widget for something, and it works perfectly.
I think it's if you look back at when you grew up and you did certain things, and then when you get older, you've been told, oh, not to do this or not to do that, or you might get dirty or whatever. Well, I'm fairly healthy, I think.
You still splash in puddles with your really
Yes,
roots.
I know.
You know.
And I used to play in with my clothes, an old clothes that you couldn't wear anymore, and you made it float in the puddles, and you were lying on your stomach with your hands in the ditch, and you got the tadpoles out. And it's all these things that you're being taught now not to do, because oh, you get dirty or whatever, or you might catch something, or you don't catch anything from that. Take it from me. But if you look back at that, you remember certain bits, and that's just been taken away. And why? Because they were actually very good.
Well, they also build up a resilience within your own body,
do,
not
yeah.
necessarily resistance or an immune
No.
Response, but a resilience
Yeah,
of how to. Well, it's being out in nature is the thing of like, how am I going to do this? And you're the only one that can come up with a solution for it. You might get it right, you might get it wrong, but you'll soon find out. You know, I mean, I remember getting a car bonnet and building a den, you know.
Other things we
It's
did.
the old car bonnet, nobody knew where it was, took my book with me, that was me, I was quite happy, you know.
Yeah.
And old milk crates, that was
But
the
it's a certain, it's a discovery, it's a creativity, it's being able to do your own thing.
Now, if you're going to build a den, you know, a lot of this is no disrespect to any mothers and fathers that are out there, but you know what a lot of mothers and fathers do is they go to the shop and they buy a little igloo that's a pop-up igloo instead of letting children and themselves build an actual den.
That's right.
You know, I mean, we used to do it in the house as well.
Yeah.
You had the old covers,
yes,
and it was like, and the clothes racks, and you used to put that round, and you used to build that den inside the house, you know, and you could be in there for a couple of days, and eventually, you know, well, for me, it was, oh, I would turn around to me, go, are we taking that down now? And I was like, oh.
But you always had the opportunity to let your imagination run riot.
That's it.
And that's been taken away, unfortunately. But having said that, in Volendam, that's next to Edam in Holland, for those people who want to check where it is, in the province of North Holland.
And it's a nice place as well.
Yeah.
It's a really nice
The
place.
children go out as soon as they see a pile of bricks or wood or whatever, they are making things with it, which is good because they let their, their energy
out, yeah.
And their imagination is running riot in some cases, but it's a good thing. And the funny thing also there is that a lot of the people that live there can, they would like to be bricklayers, joiners, and they're all going into the building trade. And there is a school there where they can do that. It's dedicated to
technician school.
Yes, the technician school, and it's a very good thing.
Did that not go there?
That went there, and you can become a motor mechanic or whatever. But that's what it focuses on. And things like learning English and Dutch, they almost become secondary, which is not a bad thing because they do put the focus on the skills. And a lot of young boys would rather
than academia
use their hands than going for the academia.
I mean, that's quite a lot of young people who I mean, they're not even that old, under 10s, who really don't take to academia at all.
No.
And I can't fault them on that score, but nothing's done to help them.
No, I think it should. If your child, shows that it would rather play with wood and put it together, and you think, oh, that's not too bad, encourage it because it'll come into its own.
Them, not it.
Right, good child. Sorry about that.
It's an it.
Encourage your child because it's going to benefit the child in the long run. And
it benefits everybody as well because if you're doing something that you're passionate about,
you're going to do it well.
Exactly. And you'll always push yourself to learn more and more and more about how can that be done better. How would that work if we did it this way? Trying out different things because the amount of joiners or tailors or whatever who have got bits lying around, and if they actually had the time, they would make absolutely fantastic, but they don't get the time because they're strapped out because we don't have enough joiners and builders, and they all go into predominantly the building trade instead of actually looking also at the people who want to do up the houses, and that's become a big thing during this who lots of people doing up the houses. I mean, DIY is great, but why is DIY great? Because a lot of men and women would like to do those sort of things, but they have a job doing whatever. They don't get the chance to actually just sit and potter around with the things that they get a pleasure from. And they don't know that they might get a pleasure from tiling because they've never tried it before.
But it's also got to do with the fact that all your time is already divided up. You must do it. And a lot of children, when they come out of school, they must have out of school activities. So they go to, they enroll in football, badminton, whatever, and they have a hurried meal, not sitting together where you can exchange, what have you been up to today? I heard about you going down the street, and
we always had meals at the table. It was very rare that we didn't.
That's right. But now it's, in a way, if you need to go to your sports school or whatever, you go to the ping, it's ready, but you have your meal at 5:30, and I might be getting around to 6:15, and you're like ships passing in the night. There is no exchange anymore. Whereas it should be a central get together and exchange, and you pay attention to what each member of the family is doing. And I think everybody benefits.
It also gives both adults and younger people a chance to ask questions.
Yeah, and an insight into their world.
This is it, because it is. I mean, let's be honest with this. Younger people have got a totally different world to me. I mean, I'm the sort of like middle-ish generation. I know about video games and things like that, but I also know that they're a complete distraction. Now, that wouldn't stop somebody from playing video games because if that's their thing, they can be really good at it. But what I'm concerned about is how it's being utilised and how it's being done in a really conformed way. And it's for an end, basically.
When you go children, I was one of them that always asked, but why?
Yeah, I did that as well.
And then they say, well, just because, but why? And just keep asking why. And you can do that as an adult too.
Yeah, it's that thing of like your curiosity should never ever stop. No. It really shouldn't stop because you kind of die a death, really.
Yeah.
If
Once you get the answer, that's it. That's dead.
Yeah.
And you might move on to the next thing. But if you keep on digging and you wondered, I've got an answer, but it doesn't answer the whole thing, why doesn't it do that? And then you look better.
The other
That's
thing
it.
is that things that we're turning, a lot of us are turning up now, is that a lot of our history is a lie.
Yeah.
You know, what we've been told is a lie.
Yeah.
And the only way we got to that point is because we continually question. Went, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why does one side of the high street look old,
But it isn't.
but it isn't? They actually, the side that looks young is the older side.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that guys with horse and cart and very few tools built that before that, and yet it looks better. That
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense.
And then they build these houses and they put windows in the basement. But then when you walk on the ground up to the front door, you only see maybe 1/3 part of the window
Yeah.
sticking up about the ground.
That makes no
Now,
sense.
why?
No,
I mean,
nobody would do that.
No.
I mean, build a basement, yeah, absolutely, but have a window in there where you've got to have like only part of the window that's. I mean, that just
No,
doesn't
it
make
doesn't make
sense
sense
at all.
at all. No. So we're digging it out.
No,
We're
no,
digging.
yeah,
We're
no,
digging.
no builder in his right mind.
No,
The first
no,
thing he
no,
goes,
it's a waste.
excuse me, love,
No.
but do you think this is
No,
right?
no. Not
So-
even with Edam cheese with the windows.
Yeah.
No, not going to.
You'd have loads of putty then. Yeah.
Right, well, have we?
Yeah, I
done
think
enough?
that's about. Yeah, I think
Did
that's
we
about
get
it for
going
today.
on?
So I hope
Yeah.
you've enjoyed it. Hopefully we've given you more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Things to think about. And obviously, if you've got questions, pop on the Telegram channels.
Let
Ask
us
the
know.
questions. Let us know. Even in the comments box on YouTube or any of the other platforms that we put it up on. Let us know. We will get to it eventually. And I hope you've enjoyed the fireside chat with Mum. Thanks very much, Mum.
Thank you. Bye now.